Honestly, so this song I think very much relates to what a lot of the Jewish people have been living for the past almost 18 months, and certainly spoke to some of the pain that I felt personally. I guess there are several lines that really resonated in particular, which we can talk about specifically. But I think the over and over and over again melody hit me because I'm exhausted. We're exhausted. This has just been going on for so long, whether we're talking about since October 7th or we're talking about since the, beginning of anti-Semitism or beginning of creation. But the fact that you can just hear within those words and you're singing this exhale, but yet you can't take a breath. We have to keep going, It just really resonated.
That was Rabbanit Alissa Thomas-Newborn discussing the song The Golden Rule. I'm Shep Rosenman. This is The Rest is Commentary, where we discuss what songs inspired by the Psalms, or Tehillim, inspire in my guests. Alissa is the Rabbanit at Congregation Netivot Shalom in Teaneck, New Jersey. She is a staff chaplain at New York Presbyterian Columbia University Irving Medical Center, and she is the president of NAJC, Neshama Association of Jewish Chaplains. From 2014 to 2022, Alissa served as a spiritual leader at B'nai David Judea as the first Orthodox female clergy in a shul in Los Angeles. That's where we met. A writer and speaker, Rabbanit Alissa received her ordination from Yeshivat Maharat and her BA from Brandeis University. She is the author of the newly released Shabbat Guidebook for Parents, Halacha and Caring for Infants, Toddlers, and Young Children on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Alissa and her husband Akiva live in Teaneck, New Jersey with their children Ella and Liam. Some context. I turned to Psalm 109 and wrote The Golden Rule in response to a deeply troubling experience of anti-Semitism at a meeting organized by the Oxnard City Council in January 2024. Individuals bust in from outside Oxnard, sought to silence the Oxnard Jewish minority in the room. It was the first time in years I'd confronted anti-Semitism directly in person. The council did an amazing job of balancing both sides' interests. It ultimately disbanded the meeting based on the increasing disruptions and growing threat of violence that came from the folks trying to silence those of us speaking up on behalf of Israel. The song tells my experience of that story. You can find it wherever music is streamed, and there's also a video on YouTube. I invited Rabbanit Alissa to discuss the song a month or so before Pesach, Passover, 2025. I moved up production of this episode in the wake of the anti-Semitic attack in Boulder, Colorado on June 1st, 2025. This episode is dedicated to the individuals who march as part of the Run for Their Lives movement that was attacked in Boulder, and to all other demonstrators who express support for Israel, demand a return of the hostages, and to anyone who speaks up as an ally of the Jewish community and or Israel in this time of crisis and increasing danger. Alissa and I discussed the role of music in exploring social issues, the exhaustion felt by the Jewish community and other communities in times of crisis, the impact of trauma on communication, October 7th, anti-Semitism, the need for constructive dialogue, especially in difficult situations, and so much more. Let's start off by listening to The Golden Rule.
Council fighting for a principle. I am mostly skeptical what haters have to say is bull. They do not know their history. It's all a woven fantasy. There really is no mystery. This is the scourge of bigotry. Listen and recall to every fact that they got wrong. Every hate-filled logic bomb, a verbal pogrom. We respect their given right. Didn't say a thing, it's fine. We were choking our frustration for in our imagination. We assumed our abdication from heckling their damnation of the Israel we love. A haven for the Jewish club. Resolution 181 is how the UN got it done. But the haters got it wrong. Over and over again, over and over again, over and over and over and over again. Don't do to others what is hateful to you. This is what's sacred, it's the golden rule. Don't do to others what is hateful to you. This is what's sacred, it's the golden rule. And when we finally spoke from the heart. The haters led with performance art. Each of them played a part, and they coughed and they clapped, and their flyers they were flapped, shouting shame with disdain, anything just to demean, yelling guilty and genocide, and anything they wanna buy, shoving flags into the aisle, saying I hate you with a smile, loading, floating up like fire, with haters for our babies in the Nile. And the council warned them that it would brook no mayhem, wouldn't tolerate disruption. It said over and over again, over and over again, over and over and over and over again. And for 3 hours, the haters kept on hating. They wouldn't even talk to me. To them, I was just some debris. Since I did not buy their lies, referring to dehumanize, I'm someone they chose to despise. They didn't want to normalize me. Don't do to others what is hateful to you. This is what's sacred, it's the golden rule. I finally started speaking and the haters started freaking, so the council cleared the room of every single who and whom. Yes, it turned into a brawl. Haters would not heed the call. They were chanting, they were ranting to the council, disenchanted. Haters offered no respect to a council they hoped would inspect, reflect, and object to the very existence of Israel. The haters' voices remaining shrill. And as the riot started, we heard shouting from the hall, increasing non-compliance, haters uptaking their violence. She was brought to a safe room to wait out the haters, whom yet 90 minutes later, out in front with 30 haters. Police escorted us back to avoid that riot attack. That is when they drove us home, so our cover wouldn't be blown. What was the council's decision? The haters' motion failed. Don't do to others what is hateful to you. This is what's sacred, it's the golden rule. I was always taught with pride, behave in ways that are dignified. Use that value as your guide, even if your neighbor lied. But I don't buy it fully, I've just seen too many bullies. Will the haters ever learn that when it's someone else's turn, it's respectful not to spurn, even if it makes them squirm? Until they do heed my advice. When you run into a hater, tell them quick, I'll see you later. They want into conversation, please just have the expectation. It will lead to aggravation, cause the haters will never accept the Jewish nation. Here is an alternative. Do something affirmative. Take a walk in the woods, shop for your favorite goods. Look up toward the mountains, drink cool water from a fountain. Do something that makes you grounded when you're feeling way too hounded. Turn to God if that's your thing. Maybe play some Freddie King. What's brewing in your heart? I encourage you to start doing something that's productive. Just don't debate with someone so destructive. Don't do to others what is hateful to you. This is what's sacred, it's the golden rule. Don't do to others what is hateful to you. This is what's sacred, it's the golden rule. This is what's sacred, it's the golden rule. This is what's sacred, it's the golden rule.
Hello, Rabbanit Alissa, my friend and mentor. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's so wonderful to see you too as well, my friend and mentor.
You're too kind. I don't have any titles other than Esquire, but that's a whole other thing. So I want to start here. I'm actually not going to start with the usual question, because I've mentioned the story in brief, but during COVID, when we got to the point where people would have coffee, you had coffee with me at what was then Starbucks, I think, on Pico and Robertson. And I was telling you about these songs I was writing, and I had been sharing them with you, and you had said to me, oh, each one of these songs should be a shir. And David Kasher had said the same thing, and Yaffa Epstein had said the same thing. But you were the only one when I said in response, I don't know, I've done the frontal teaching thing. Tehillim is a heart thing. Where am I going to go? It just feels wrong to turn it into a shir, a class. So you said, turn it into a podcast. And I said, isn't that the same thing? And you said there are lots of different podcast formats. Why don't you listen to some and simmer on it? And I had already been listening to podcasts. I was a big fan of Serial when it first came out, and Mayim had already had a podcast. So I sat with it for a year and came up with this format. So in the vein of Hakaras Hatov, I want to say thank you for making me do the work to build this structure. I think you and Sherry Hirsch kind of were the twin impulses, in that you asked me for the what and Sherry asked me for the why. And the why, like, I couldn't get myself to post this but for the why, which is this is a legacy for my kids to have for me to have conversations with people that I find interesting, from whom I've learned things and whom I appreciate, and they get what they get from it. And by the way, the gift to the world is that the world gets what they get from it, however many listeners they end up having. So thank you very, very much for starting me on this journey.
I take very, very, very little credit for that, but I appreciate so much that you continue to give me Hakaras Hatov. I'm so glad that you actually brought it to life, because I felt like there was so much that was so rich and, like, not only thoughtful and well sourced, but also like really engaging in a way that, I'm sure anyone who would be listening now would already know. It's very meaningful and special that you're doing this. So thank you for bringing your Torah into the world in this way.
Thank you. So with that, let's turn to the question. I keep repeating it because not every listener, even though some listeners can fast forward through this, not every listener will have heard the others and has the context for this. My view of creativity is that creators, including rabbis and educators and app creators and we are engaged in a process of imitatio Dei. We are trying to be like, not like godlike in the sense that, which is of course very relevant to some of what you do for a living because you work with doctors. Not in that sense, but we're trying to get close to the creator by acting like the creator. And so we try to connect. We connect into the muse, the energy, the world, the universe, whatever it is, and we try to bring that forth into the world. And, one word for that is inspiration. And in the same way that the Psalms inspired me to write songs, and it's not just the Psalms, as we'll see in the song we're covering today, it's the connection between daily life and the Psalms. I hope that the songs inspire something in you. I'm agnostic on whether that should be hope or hatred, love or loathing. Like, that's not, sure, as a songwriter, my ego wants to know, did you love it? Did it move you? But more important than that for this podcast is, what did it inspire in you? So let's start with that question and we'll see where the conversation goes.
I just think it's very, very holy that you're using the text and the music to bring out the divinity within each person. So thank you for inspiring that in me. Honestly, so this song, I think, very much relates to what a lot of the Jewish people have been living for the past almost 18 months, and certainly spoke to some of the pain that I felt personally. I guess that there are several lines that really resonated in particular, which we can talk about specifically. But I think that, like, the over and over and over again melody hit me because I'm exhausted. We're exhausted. This has just been going on for so long, whether we're talking about since October 7th or we're talking about since the, beginning of anti-Semitism or beginning of creation. But the fact that you can just hear within those words and you're singing this, like, exhale, but yet you can't take a breath. Like, we have to keep going, It just really resonated.
Well, so what has it been like for you? Well, let's first of all, thank you for raising that. I think you hit the nail on the head. And even though the over and over again was about what was going on at the city council, because the mayor, and I want to be super clear, I think the council and the police and the fire department in Oxnard did an amazing job managing a very, very difficult situation. They really wanted to honor the value, the right of free speech. And that's why they kept saying order, order, like be quiet, control the room over and over and over again to underscore the importance of that right. And then when it just got too much, the mayor said, okay, clear the room. Let's see if we can get everybody calm.
And then at the very end, I really appreciated that there was explanation about that right. You know, after, you know, whatever ensued, because I wasn't there, and they you know, keep you off screen. So I only know what you shared. But the fact that, you know, what was explained afterward was that we have a right to speak, and that the small minority can take away from the majority voice, and how, you know, that even if we disagree, we don't silence each other.
Right.
You know, the world we live in now, that's actually quite common.
Yeah, well, it's at the core of what I think is the tension in the democratic system right now. And we can very easily get into American or Israeli politics right now. And I want to on the one hand, and I don't want to on the other. I think we're living in a... Go ahead. You clearly have something to say there.
You know, I was just going to say that I think just going back to the music within that, I also, you know, it had this punk rock feeling to it. And especially when I was in high school, I was very into punk. So it was like nice to hear that again, honestly. But what I wanted to say is that also stood out to me, that there was this feeling of like, we're not getting angry. We're trying to keep law and order. And also the music is angry. Like there's yelling. And I guess that fine line of what is, you know, freedom of speech versus what is actually harming someone else. And one of the things that I actually, you know, has become something I've learned more about, and I think has impacted the way that I have processed our reality, is that there's, you know, a concept of violence, like workplace violence, for example. God forbid anyone experiences that. But workplace violence doesn't necessarily mean, you know, a person hitting another person. Violence in that setting can be with language. It can be with, you know, just creating an environment where someone doesn't feel safe. And to think that, you know, violence could be felt, you know, without any sort of physical action, I think that, you know, it almost at this point, like, doesn't really need to be explained to any of us. But on October 6th, I might have been like, you know, would have been a little more esoteric for me, or maybe would have been more about like domestic violence or something along those lines. But the what you were experiencing, it was violent before it got physical. Yeah.
But I think this is what I was touching on, or where I was about to touch on. I had the pleasure of studying with someone named Barry Johnson many, many years ago, 2001, I think. And he runs this thing called polarity management. It's an incredible, and I think I've talked about it before in this context. It's an incredible structure for thinking, in particular about managing communities, corporate entities. Anytime you have more than one person and you have to take another person's values, higher goals, and fears into account. And he creates this, it's an XY axis where the top of the axis is everyone's higher goal, and the bottom of the axis is what everyone's afraid of. And the XY is, well, what are the choices we might make given whatever the issue is? So, you know, what if you go to a Chinese, what do you want for dinner is not a values-based question. Whether you want to, and I'm going to name this issue, engage in hiring based on DEI principles is. And so there are going to be fears about that, right? So, but the higher goal is, well, let's make believe the higher goal is to uplift all of humanity. And I know that that's a broader goal than what some DEI aficionados might want. But if that's the goal, that's at the top of the axis. And the fear is that somebody will be left behind, right? And I'm really
That's not fair.
oversimplifying. Exactly. So if you go all the way to the right and only higher DEI, well, then on the bottom left, you have the fear of the non-DEI people, historically white males, but not always, being left behind. And if you go all the way to the left, well, then you lose the principle of DEI entirely, and you're only hiring white males in this example. So Barry Johnson argues what every corporate or communal entity wants is it wants to be in an infinity loop around the center. You're constantly adjusting things, so it's a little bit too much on the DEI today, a little bit too much on the side of white males tomorrow, and back and forth, but you're always staying up, moving like with the infinity leap largely above where the axis point. I don't know if anyone can understand that from a visual. You at least had my hands helping out.
Yeah.
So that is a centralist, approach the world from the center modality, much like the Rambams, the Maimonides. We're all Beinonim. We're all in between, and we've got to take care of the in between. And yes, there are exceptions on either end, but if you focus on the center, then we all get uplifted together. That is not the way the world works in our politics right now. It is the minority, whether it's the extreme progressive left or the extreme conservative right, that is defining the way the United States and Israel are moving forward. And by the way, those are only two among many examples in the world. So how do we, as regular people, I'm putting aside the October 7th piece of this for a moment because we just got here. I want to come back to that. How do we, as regular people, manage our lives in a world where we are constantly confronted with extremes?
So I appreciate you raising that and framing it that way, because I think I've been grappling with that question for, over a year. And in part, it was because I think I've been trying at different stages, because I do a lot of interfaith work, to maintain relationships where there's a lot of trauma and a lot of pain and a hesitancy to talk or trust between each other. And sometimes those are conversations that should happen or should be delayed or reframed. And sometimes those are conversations that shouldn't happen. And that, it was really stood out to me toward the end of your song, what are you going to engage with the haters? Right. And is that a conversation worth having? I mean, you clearly came out with no, that's, do something good, like do a mitzvah, do something life affirming rather than, sort of losing yourself in that battle. But I guess, knowing that line is a very hard thing to navigate. And in particular for me, I'll just say that a piece of wisdom that came from from a Zionism conference that I was at recently, which was really great, was the idea of the swayable middle, that there's the different extremes and then there's the people in the middle. And we usually hear the extremes on either side, and they're often they're the loudest or they're the biggest on social media. But there's actually a very large center of people who are open and, swayable in terms not necessarily of manipulating, but just having an open dialogue, or, not having hatred, or that, what you experienced happen, that actually isn't the norm. But it's hard when we begin to get inundated with that information. And it feels like, every single city council, town council, whatever conversation is about this, everything's falling apart when we're living with, being inundated with those extremes, when the reality is that there's a lot of us who are very connected and want to stay connected. I'll just share that I live in Teaneck, and in Teaneck that, similar conversations have happened. Our Board of Education and other things, have become platforms for people to engage around these kinds of topics. And it pulls at the fibers of, I think, the community feeling connected to each other. And yet we're all gathering together and living together and on the same streets. We're neighbors, and yet you still feel that tension. So holding, the reality that we have tension and we're also together doesn't mean we have to pull apart. But then in what ways do we have red lines that can't be crossed?
Right.
It takes a lot of discerning to know where that line is.
Yeah, I think that's the key piece of this. And while I, with certitude in the song, express, if you run into a hater, tell him quick, I'll see you later. You don't know who's a hater until they express that. And moving as the event was, I was not prepared to write a song that was an hour and 40 minutes long. My first draft was like 25 minutes long, and I was like, that's too much. And I think really that the source of why I struggled with that line in particular. So I talk about the flyers, and some of the flyers were pictures of Palestinian children who had been injured or killed by Israeli bombs. The mayor actually kicked out an Israeli guy because the mayor kept saying, "Well, I'm going to give you one more shot," and then he would give them another shot and another shot. And the group supporting the censoring of Israel, when the mayor did that, they quieted down for a minute. When the mayor told this Israeli guy to quiet down, he refused to. So he was kicked out. After that, we took a break to try to calm things down. During this break, there was, people got up from their seats. And what I noticed was that these organizers who came in would go to their supporter, their team, and they would point out to take the people's seats to make sure that they were on camera. Like, okay, they're very good at what they do. They're clearly organized about this. Whereas we were more grassroots. They were, and maybe this is grassroots organization too, but it felt more like political action than grassroots organization. So, but all of that is running through my mind. Again, my cynicism is increasing, and there's a young man who says he's Jewish, who is trying to censor Israel. I'm like, if you want to have coffee with me and talk about this, I'm happy to do so. And he doesn't talk to me. He won't acknowledge that I spoke to him. Then there's another young woman, and I point out to her, I said, I just want to mention that people are stepping on these flyers. If you feel like these flyers are important because of the lives of these children, just think about whether or not you want people stepping on the flyers. They're your flyers. I don't want to touch them. I want to be respectful to you. And she's engaging with me. She said, well, it's your rabbi who threw the flyers on the floor. I'm like, if he did, and I don't think he did, but if he did, I think that was wrong, and I would tell him that. But that's not my point. My point is they're your flyers. People are stepping on them. If you want them stepped on, great. If you don't, you should pick them up. So as I'm saying this, one of those organizers comes over and whispers into this woman's ear in a stage whisper and says, and this is a line in the song, you can't talk to him. Doing so normalizes them. And that's where my head exploded, because I had been in a modality where, okay, we can disagree with each other, but there's a civic decorum and you're just breaching it. But the fact that you don't even see me as human, as quote, normal. Okay, my kids call me not normal, but not in the same way.
Right. You said the dehumanized, not normalized.
Yeah. And that to me, that's when you hit a level like that, you're clearly dealing with a hater. Whereas the woman I was dealing with, we might have gotten to the hater point. We might not have. I told this story to Rabbi Browse in another episode. When I was in college, I was part of the Council of Jewish Organizations, and it's a much longer story, but we were having similar meetings between the Black and the Jewish student communities. And it was basically just the extremists yelling at each other the whole time. And these 3 Black kids were having lunch in one of the kosher restaurants in the kosher restaurant in the student union. And they saw me and my friend Gary Statmauer and invited us to have a conversation. We saw that you guys were in this meeting. These were clearly Beinonim. These were middle-of-the-roaders. They're not haters. And look, I'm not friendly with any of them today, but that action of calling us over powerfully impacted my life and got me to this headspace of believing that you can actually talk to people with differences. You just have to get to know them first and see them as people first before you can revise anyone's perspective.
Right. And it is hard to think, though, that someone could hate you or hate me that much. Like, I'm thinking of how you, in your song, or at least in the way the lyrics were written out, capitalized hater.
Yeah.
Like, in the same way you capitalize, like, whatever, Lahavdil, God. Like, why, or someone's name. And I was wondering about that choice to capitalize other than emphasis, but it definitely, it's like a known entity that, like, when you don't know someone is hating, or you suspect they don't, there's that opening. But then once they do, like, it's hard almost as a human to digest that hate is real.
Yeah, for sure. Here's where I landed. I think in the spirit of the conversation we've been having, how do you know who's a hater? Well, a hater gets a capital. Someone who's swayable, who hates you in the moment, does not. They get a lowercase. And those are the swayable middle. Potentially. Even some of them are not. And those people, if in the course of the conversation, with Pesach coming up, if they harden their hearts, well, they harden their letters and they become capitals as well. But that's where there's a choice. I believe in all of this, there's a choice. But some of it is the way you're bred. Some of it is the news you read. If you only read the extreme news on either side of the spectrum, you're going to get one picture. This is becoming much harder to do. If you read a range of news and find voices that align with your values, whether you end up on the left, the right, or the center, or the extremes, okay, it doesn't matter. I advocate against the extremes, either of them, but that's just based on my personal experience. As a deal maker, this comes up all the time. If I have a studio person who is unable or unwilling to listen to facts and rationality, or even a client, we have clients sometimes who don't care about what is or isn't business practice, we're not going to get a deal done. It's just never going to happen. It's only going to happen if everyone is willing to be educated. That's the studio side. We're getting X, Y, and Z from the people we buy projects from. And the creator side, we're getting X, A, B, and C from the studio side. And somewhere in there's a middle ground if you want to make a deal. Now, look, it's possible that Warner Brothers won't make this deal, but A24 will. And so, well, maybe Warner Brothers isn't the right home for your project, but A24 is. And the crazy part is Warner Brothers may end up doing some of the distribution for A24, and so Warner Brothers will end up back in the project. But it's a great microcosm of this bigger issue. Ultimately, I decided on the capitalization because it made it clear that it's limited to anyone who is, in fact, a hater, even if the story itself doesn't make it clear that way. But that's why I made that choice.
I was going to say, just to build on that, I think you mentioned at the beginning this idea of the Beinonim, the people who are on the in-between, and how, especially like at the Chagim, we're supposed to think at the holidays that we are the in-between. Like, we don't expect ourselves to be the tzaddikim, the most righteous of people. We don't expect ourselves to be the Rishayim, the most wicked of people. How we're supposed to see ourselves, and the Baal HaTanya actually writes about this extensively in his Tanya, is we're really supposed to see ourselves in that middle place. And if everyone looks at themselves as in the middle place, there's a very different meeting point. But it takes humility, and it also takes a willingness to hear each other. And when there's trauma, that's very, very hard.
Sure.
It's, again, sort of naming the experience of the Jewish community right now, but I don't think it's limited to the Jewish community, is like a turning inward as opposed to a looking outward. And there are kind of ebbs and flows throughout our history, but thinking about turning inward, it's like too painful to talk to someone who has, a different viewpoint when it actually strikes at the core of who we are or our family safety or something along those lines. And I remember talking to a Muslim colleague who said to me, like, there are some things in relation to trauma that she just felt couldn't be discussed. And that, when a person is in that level of pain, it's not possible. And my reaction was that I actually think, at least in the Jewish world, we're challenged davka in that space. Like when we are suffering, to engage. I mean, we relive the Seder of our suffering,
right,
and engage and grapple with it. Like we don't say, okay, I'm experiencing trauma, therefore I'm not going to, create meaning or connections. Lahavdil were, the opposite were the, Viktor Frankl Jews who search for meaning and suffering. And if we can connect in a time of suffering, that is such a deeper connection.
But I'm a little bit, I'm a lot surprised by your Muslim colleagues' comments, because they too, as I understand it, the Tehillim are among their texts, and that is the core of Tehillim. David turns to God in distress, and when we study these texts together or read them together, which, again, as I understand, the Muslims do as well, that's what we're doing. We're talking to each other about our distress. We're not necessarily talking about David's distress or Moshe's or the sons of Korach. We're overlaying our own distress and trauma on top of David's. So did you ask her about the textuality of that?
I mean, not specifically about Psalms, though I wish you had been there to ask that question. Like, let's sit down and look at Tehillim together. So a couple things. First, in this specific encounter, it was really coming from a place of, when we are mourning children being killed, we don't have room to talk about anti-Semitism in America. And that, almost like the house is on fire and you're talking to me about, fire safety or something. And that, we can't have certain conversations because we're not coming from the same place. And I think, we viscerally feel that as Jews. Like there are some things I can't expose myself to that media, or I can't expose myself to that opinion, or I can't engage with that thought because it is so antithetical to who I am, or it's so corrosive to my neshama, to my spirit. But I think when we're existing in such different realities, I mean, because we are, at the end of the day, if that, in that, kind of conversation, if on her mind are children who are being killed, and on my mind are children being killed, and they're a mix of different kinds of children, there is still a place to meet. And so I think what was most concerning to me, obviously there's a lot of things that are concerning about what I shared, but what was most concerning to me was, how do we have any interfaith relationships if we can't talk to each other when we're suffering?
Right.
And I mean that in terms of like being the person who's suffering and needing someone else to hear and support. And it's sort of like the foundation of pastoral care too. When I visit someone who's sharing, some of the worst moments of their lives with me, it's not about me. It's me hearing them and being with them. And so if we can hear each other without it becoming a fight of who's suffering more, then it feels like there's something there. But I think, really what I would step back and say, even like to myself, if I'm in chavrusa with myself, is that some of those conversations are healthy and some of them are not. Some of them are maddening. And again, going back to your song, like the over and over again, some of those are productive in terms of, maintaining our relationship with other nations. And, there are people who are in that swayable middle who want to connect. And I think especially the Muslims in particular who stand up and speak out, including to their own detriment and the danger of their families, which is truly something that many of them face. and, being, ostracized from their communities. Like that's like, that is, one of the righteous Gentiles. That's someone who is, really should be acknowledged and should be engaged with and supported because they're doing that work. But when it's a conversation and that's just going to, no matter what, at the end of the day, the bottom line is dehumanized, not normalized.
Yeah.
It just ends up creating more trauma.
Well, so do you have a mahalach, a path for these kinds of conversations that you think apply in this day and age? And how do, look, you're skilled in this sector, in this arena, by virtue of your training and your experience. How do the rest of us? I happen to have some experience in this area, but I'm still a Benoni in this. I'm still a middle of the roader. How do we engage with other on this topic, or these topics, Israel and anti-Semitism?
So I'm going to just identify as a Benoni as well, because one, Bal Hatanya, we're all Benoni, but also it's just too big of a question. I don't have sometimes the question's better than the answer. And this is certainly a case of that. I will nevertheless try to offer some reflections. But again, I'm not claiming that it's necessarily fully satisfying. And that's also okay. That's part of life.
Sure. In
terms of engaging, I do think that we need to know before any conversation what we can handle and what we can't. Ask ourselves honestly, what is my goal or what is my hope in this? Maybe even set, depending on the forum, right? There are some groups who are trying to have, meeting of the minds coming together, and they have a facilitator and they have ground rules, thinking about who specifically is in the room for those conversations and why they're there, and assessing maybe we have shared goals of entering the room, but we have different opinions or something along those lines. But, someone asked me very, very early on, again, in an interfaith relationship, friendship, whatever, colleagueship, a colleague asked me, why do you keep conflating anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism? Anti-Semitism is hating Jews, and anti-Zionism is being against the occupation. And that starting point for me was excruciating, and I had to say, I remember sitting there, it was a 5-minute conversation that felt like an eternity. But I remember sitting and thinking, we are not having the same conversation. Even our words mean different things. And is that a conversation that's worth it to me? Is it a conversation that is going to be beneficial and educate? Is that actually going to have an impact? And also being honest about how painful it was. So what I chose to do, and I will admit that it took a toll on me, but what I chose to do was say, in our conversation, even naming anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism in that way, it's really painful for me to hear that. And so hard for me to have this conversation with you right now. And I'm going to try to whatever extent I can to explain where I'm coming from, but recognizing, I wasn't in a place where I was going to try to convince this person. I was just trying to authentically respond in a way that was healthy for me. So it turned out, this person was very well educated in history and just had learned a different history, right? That's part of what we're seeing, and, hadn't encountered the perspective that I had, and was, one of the Beinonim, where they were kind of in between, and their question was coming from a place of caring, and yet their question also really hurt me.
Sure.
So I think the place of sharing our humanity, speaking almost like when they emphasize in different dialogues, speaking from the place of I, not saying you whatever, but this is making me feel this way, or this is triggering for me, as well as noticing what I also speak in the I again, what I can handle hearing right now and what I can't.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had a couple other conversations where I have had to acknowledge, we aren't going to agree. We're not in the same place. In the places that we are, let's connect. In the places that we aren't, I don't think it's going to be good for either of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to cover there. My big takeaways are 3 in terms of tools for people specifically to use when you encounter someone who might be a hater and you're deciding whether or not you are willing to engage. That the core issue is really share your humanity. And you can only choose to do that if you either care enough about someone or choose to trust them enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't have to be a close friend. It can be someone who you meet at a conference, but you just look. If you're someone who believes that we've all met before in past lives, or that, souls are grouped differently and you have affinities, or there's energy, ich weiß, whatever the thing is that connects people and makes people interested in each other when they on sight, auras. I don't know what it is, right? You have to be willing to leap into that moment of trust in order to engage, even if you know it's going to come at a cost to yourself, because it's going to drain you or force you to encounter your own pain and trauma. So that's the most important thing. What is your goal and your hope? Right? I think that's also like you really have to approach these conversations with intentionality. And the other takeaway is the use of I language. I feel, I learned this again from working with Maya many, many moons ago. When I feel, I hope, will you, like there's a series of statements. We all encounter these moments, whether you're at the theater, you're at the grocery store, or you're at dinner with someone. And it's good to have a recipe. Take a breath. Hold on a sec. This is an important conversation to have. I feel like you're someone who's worthy of this. What is my goal? My hope? Whether you articulate that or not, that could be an internal thing or it can be an external thing. Again, depending on your relationship with the person.
Yeah, totally.
Share your humanity, explain your pain, explain your hopes around the issue. And this doesn't only apply to the Israel, Zionism, anti-Semitism conversation. This applies to any conflict.
Totally.
Use that I language and use that and then shut your mouth and listen carefully and hope that the person that you articulated yourself to did the same. That's where the learning happens, where you listen deeply to someone. And I would go as far as saying, particularly when you can't, when you have trouble with something that someone says, then put on your empathy hat and put yourself in their shoes to really deeply try to understand what they're saying. And that's another great tool for processing disagreement. It helps you get at where the disagreement is coming from.
Right. And that could be with, a married couple or, totally separate from these big sort of international conversations we're having.
Exactly. So I want to now turn back to October 7th. I've heard people refer to October 6th, October 7th, and October 8th. What are the different states? How are people like us and other people on the other side of the coin, how is everyone different from each of those dates?
So I think, and I'll choose to speak about this from an I point, just given what you just beautifully articulated. I can say for myself that there was loss on October 7th. Obviously, there's, degrees of how the excruciating loss that different people have felt, that our entire people has felt. But there was a loss of trust, or a loss of feeling like people were in partnership with each other. Honestly, I think, one of the things that I kept hearing over and over again from colleagues of all faiths was this feeling of I don't know what they're really thinking. They're not saying what they're thinking. I don't know if they actually hate me. And that was coming from various voices. And sort of the dan l'chafzut, judging others favorably, that seemed to have been lost, of feeling, that they no longer could trust that the other had their best interests in mind and were, had positive feelings, vibes toward them. However we want to, that can get much more intense. But I will say, the experience of being a parent and worrying about a child, or seeing, adults versus children being killed or kidnapped for whatever reason, the children are something that people hold on to the most. And there's, certainly a lot of reasons behind that. But the loss of feeling like, and I'll speak for within the Jewish context, I heard this in my congregation, I heard this in the hospital setting, the feeling of October 7th showed that parents could be in their homes with their children and not be able to protect them. And that is terrifying. And no parent wants to think that, no child wants to think that. And that invasion and violation, and obviously the violation, there's the sexual abuse that was committed, and just the horrific things that happened on that day. The October 8th survivor of that moment, I think relates to trust and humanity and interaction differently forever. Because on October 6th, I wasn't ruminating about keeping my child safe in my own home in the morning hours. And I'm not living in Israel, but I think that this is, Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, and obviously, of course, in Israel. But that feeling, of, yes, we're worrying about anti-Semitism, we're worrying about various wars. We're not oblivious to hatred that has existed against Jews. And the war didn't start on October 7th. That October 6th self, though, I think, at least for me, I'll say, wasn't ruminating on certain things so much. And then the October 7th was that tremendous trauma. And the October 8th is like everything fell apart. How do we put it back together? And maybe actually it can't be put back together. And we need to create something new, or we need to focus on something new. And I'm not saying that in relation to interfaith specifically. I'm saying that in relation to even like a sense of identity. So there was Rav Shlomo Katz, who has amazing music and Hasidus that he teaches. He's in Israel. He did a Netivot Malka a few months back here in Teaneck. And one of the things that he shared about a new song that he was singing, just to bring it back to music, was that we are, since October 7th, he's seen in Israel and around the world, us becoming an Am Chadash, becoming a new people with a Lev Chadash, with a new heart. And to create something new, almost like the phoenix from the ashes or something, like we're still a part of what once was, but also I think everyone has been pushed to see themselves and their world and their purpose differently.
Right. Well, look, so this goes to the notion that we each, even without October 7th, we are each encountering traumas throughout our lives, deaths of parents. You went through that recently. I went through it a long, long time ago. And there are still these moments where I'm re-encountering that trauma. And as you said, every Pesach, we re-encounter the trauma of the Exodus. And every summer, we re-encounter the trauma of the destruction of God knows how many people from being in the Midbar and choosing to rebel against God, the desert, and choosing to rebel against God again. We reread these things. And look, 3,500 years later, like I don't experience the trauma on a personal level, but 18 months later, I do.
Right. And that's like the Hisha Amda in the Seder, like the text that in every generation this is experienced. The October 6th Jew heard that very differently than the October 8th Jew does.
Yeah. Anyway, this was great. On one small personal note, it sounds like you have a relationship with Rabbi Shlomo Katz. Has he shared with you that he spent some time in Teaneck as a youth?
You know what? He did. He also really identifies with his LA background. So as someone who's from LA, that's, I think where I connect with him more. But he did actually at the Netivot Malka, he did say publicly, like I usually say I'm from LA, but I'm actually from Teaneck or whatever.
His father, Avshalom, who was the cantor at Beth Jacob and then was at the cantor at wherever he was in Teaneck for some time, is one of my most important mentors. He ran the music program at Camp Raleigh. When I first started writing songs, he was the one who kind of gave me feedback and helped me. And I have such Hakar Satov, debt of gratitude to him as well.
Oh, I love that. And that also goes full circle,
Yep.
of finding the people who help us connect with our music and our Torah.
That's so beautiful also. Thank you so, so much. You're awesome. Again, thank you for helping inspire this. Thank you for giving me your time here. And I look forward to continuing the conversation in some way.
Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome. It really is a something I'm very grateful to have done.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for listening. Special thanks to Rabbanit Alissa Thomas-Newborn for joining me, to Devin Schwartz and E-Rose for their help in producing this episode, especially on such a short turnaround, and to Jessica Chana-Sweedler for her help on social media. You can find The Golden Rule and all of the other songs in this song cycle on most platforms that stream or download music, including Spotify and Apple. And for this particular song, you can also find a video of it on YouTube. In the next episode of The Rest is Commentary, I will be talking to Israel-based Rabbi Yehuda Geberer, the host of the Jewish History Soundbites podcast, history researcher, educator, and tour guide. Perhaps most important, Yehuda is my nephew. We discuss the power of self-reflection, the significance of humor in coping with life's challenges, the importance of having a sense of humor, and when certain types of humor are or are not appropriate, wordplay, participating in history, tapping into eternity, grappling with the past, visiting dead relatives, and so much more. All inspired by Yehuda's thoughts after listening to Can't Stay Here Long, inspired by Psalm 16, and a visit to my parents' graves in Jerusalem. Please join us.